Well, we're coming to you from an unnamed ramp this morning in an unnamed aircraft. Now, you might think it's a flight test experimental aircraft because of these space age props with space age shape. But if you're an accomplished aviator, you might recognize the propeller shape as something else. One look at the gear will tell you that it's retractable because of the gear doors, if nothing else. And then, if you take another look at the curled tip, you know all too well, hopefully from articles and photographs, not from personal experience, that this aircraft suffered a gear up landing. Now, I know from the scuttlebutt that it wasn't intentional. It was unintentional. There's an old adage about retractable gear pilots. There are those that have had a gear up landing and those that will. So we're going to talk a little bit about gear up landings and incidents, not in detail, but with photographs and a brief discussion. Won't be a long tape. I can tell you that I've never had one, and I can also admit that I almost did. So we'll leave the flight line and return to the computer. You won't have to look at my face today for this briefing, just some pictures, and listen to my wonderful voice. And then I'll let you go on to bigger and better things. We won't belabor the point, but it's worth touching, I'd say. I'll be right back. So, retractable gear aircraft experience gear up landings. And statistics show us how many gear up landings, I guess, but they don't show us how many pilots make more than one gear up landing. And I just can't help but think no pilot makes more than one. Now, the first gear up landing that a pilot makes is in spite of numerous horns, beeps, checklist items designed to prevent that gear up landing. But they all fail because pilots make a gear up landing in spite of that. But let us assume that pilot never makes a second gear up landing. So why is that? Because the same safeguards failed to prevent the first gear up landing, but apparently they succeed in preventing the second gear up landing. So if you're an aviator that had a gear up landing, what prevents you from making the second one? It's an interesting question. And if anybody has an answer, write a book, make a video, tell us all why. It's something in the mentality of flying an airplane, making a mistake, and then vowing never to do it again. Now, the one that I mentioned that almost happened to me was in a 141. And the 141 warning system that prevents you from landing gear up is tied to selecting landing flaps, because the 141 has two flap settings, no flap or full flap. And no flap landing is very rare. But I was giving a check ride and it wasn't no flap, but when we went to flaps landing, the pilot I was giving a check ride to forgot the gear, and I did too. So he called for flaps landing. We went to flaps landing and we got the horn. So we brought the flaps back up to approach. We brought the gear down, went to flaps landing, didn't get the horn, and did our touch and go. So I do know of another 141 incident where they landed gear up because they were doing a no flap landing. So whatever your system is that prevents your gear up landing, if it's tied to the flaps or whatever it is, and you don't get that warning horn or whatever, there are other indications. Your power setting isn't right. You don't need as much power. Well, of course you don't, because the wheels aren't down. Or the noise in your cockpit isn't as loud. Why? Because your wheels aren't down. So there are other clues that you're missing. You're floating. Why are you floating? Because you don't have the drag. But at any rate, whatever those clues are that the pilot misses that contribute to a gear up landing, that pilot never misses again. I guess once burned, twice shy, or whatever the case may be. Now, some of these photos, you say, well, it must have been an intentional gear up landing because there's foam around the airplane. Well, a lot of airports don't have foam anymore, and if it's intentional, in the old days, they foamed the whole runway because they don't know where the airplane's going to land. Well, foam is expensive, and they don't do that much anymore. They wait for the airplane to land, and then they foam right around where the airplane came to a stop. But generally what happens now is the airplane lands, the pilot says, oh shit, and then the crew comes out and foams around where the airplane came to a stop to minimize the chance of a fire after the fact. So it's hard to tell when the airplane lands if it was intentional or not, but generally not. So at any rate, listen to the clues that say, boy, this airplane is quiet, or it's floating, or whatever, and try and avoid that first one. And apparently we learned real well as a community never to do a second one. So food for thought. Good bar question anyway. Go out, fly safe, have fun, and once again, second time I'm saying it, fly safe.